Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this epic episode of Mormon Stories podcast. We are here interviewing Jerry and Julie and Laurie and Doug. And they just spent 4 hours with us telling us about their incredible, epic Mormon journey where they were orthodox for decades, 4 decades, in both pairs, really committed to the church. We talked about Doug's faith, crisis of faith, and how that became a shared experience for their entire families. So this is all part, just to remind everyone, this is all part of the Mormon Faith Crisis Project that we're launching this year in 2018 through the Open Stories Foundation. If you go to mormonfaithcrisis.com, you'll be able to follow what we're doing. But what we're doing is we're going to have a weekly podcast with me, people like Natasha Elfer Parker, my wife Margie, and maybe others, where we're going to be able to talk about all the different issues that confront someone in a Mormon faith crisis. It'll be similar to the Mormon Transitions podcast that we did last year, but with a lot more depth and a lot more structure and planning. So look forward to that in the coming year or two. And what we're also going to do is we're going to be interviewing just regular couples, regular families, regular individuals, and we're going to be exploring sort of the Mormon faith crisis in depth. Not only what the experience is, but most importantly, there's going to be an emphasis on how people handled it, what mistakes they made, what they did right, what they did wrong, and what lessons they learned, and what things, and where they are now, and how they're rebuilding a wonderful, happy life. And the actual concept is, we're calling it the gift of the Mormon faith crisis, because in reality, even though it might feel horrific, it might feel terrible, it might feel scary, in our experience, if you do it right, if you follow certain guidelines, if you keep your wits about you and bring as much poise and wisdom as you can to the experience, what you have in store for you is better mental health, a life grounded in reality, better marital and intimate relationships. You have a chance at being a better parent than you ever thought before, forging the better friendships than you ever had before, finding better community than you ever had before, and even sometimes enhanced spirituality and self-worth, new careers. There are all sorts of gifts that come from a faith crisis if you kind of do it right. And I also want to emphasize that the focus here is not on losing belief or keeping belief or leaving the church or staying in the church. We're going to be spotlighting people of all those different types. And in reality, what's important is that people are happy and healthy and thriving. It doesn't matter whether and you can do that in the church or out of the church, with belief or without. So try not to pay too much attention to whether or not people stay or leave or believe or don't, because there's still lessons to be learned and experiences to discuss, in the trenches of a faith crisis that really has no bearing on those sorts of, I would say, inconsequential things as to whether or not you stay or believe anymore. And so we've had a wonderful 4 hours, and we're going to dive into another 2, 3, 4 hours, believe it or not. And what we're going to be talking about now, if we can all survive, if you're not too exhausted, we're going to talk about, how to navigate things in the faith crisis once it sort of happens. So as we left off in the first 4 hours, both Jerry and Julie and Laurie and Doug had lost their faiths. They had sort of come together and realized that they were going to be sharing this experience. And then they are sort of facing how to pick up their lives and move forward. So we want to thank everyone who's joining us live on Facebook. We want to encourage your questions and comments about their journey. If you post the questions now, I'll be able to weave them into the narrative of this interview. And we want to just thank everyone for supporting us. So with that, I think the very first thing that we sort of started to touch on was the children. Mm-hmm. Because, other than your marital relationship, the kids are the most immediate family members. So if it's okay, why don't we start with you guys, Laurie and Doug. How did you approach telling your kids what went right with that and what didn't go so great with that.
Okay. Well, so we had been going through the whole summer, Julie and Jerry and I really diving in, and it was fall. I can't remember, probably about October. Our oldest was a senior in high school, preparing to go on a mission the next summer, and we, especially Doug, was feeling a little bit of an urgency to talk to our kids. They had no idea all of these years and everything that Doug and I had been through. We had not disclosed any of it to our kids. We tried very, very hard to talk about things when they weren't around, but obviously I think our children could feel that there was a little bit of contention in our home that normally wasn't there. So I was still going through my faith crisis. I was seeing the writing on the wall. I had done a lot of studying and a lot of research, and I knew where I was gonna end up, and that I was gonna be on the same page with Doug. And so I still, though, was very, very worried about telling our children. I thought it was gonna devastate them. That was the biggest fear, is what are our children going to think? How will they ever survive without the church? All of those fears were running through my head, but I agreed along with Doug that it was time that we needed to talk to our kids and let them know what was going on.
So I think also we should also say that as that summer was ending, we went back to counseling.
Yeah.
And
we went back not for our relationship, but more to get some advice on how to talk to our children about it, how to break the news to them. And
do you want to share who you went to?
Yeah, so we went to Jenny Morrow.
She was great.
You know, we had listened to her many times on Mormon Expressions and, you know, Mormon Stories, and already knew quite a bit about her. And somebody recently said on another podcast that, you know, the good thing about therapy is, like, there are these things that you don't know what you don't know, right? The science of counseling and therapy is real, and we all think that we can just wing it by talking to our best friend. And I'm a firm believer that, you know, psychology and therapy really is, you know, a science, and I don't understand it, and I don't know what I'm dealing with that somebody might be able to point out and help me with. So, you know, I got to sit back over that summer and watch these three ruminate and all this church history stuff and kind of let them do their thing. And I kind of stayed back and stayed out of it, except for when they brought me into it. But towards the end of the summer, I just went to Laurie and said, I think we should go see somebody who really has a lot of experience with faith transitions. So we went and started seeing Jenny Morrow. She did help us each other because, you know, Laurie was seeing the intellectual stuff, but she was still dealing with the emotional stuff. And so it was helpful for us as a couple still, I think, and really, I think, for her a lot to sit down and talk with Jenny. And so, you know, she gave us a lot of advice on how to talk to our children and how to approach that. And so, you know, Laurie was, like she said, she was very scared. What if we're making a mistake?
Do you want to talk about how you felt, Laurie?
I was just very scared, very nervous. I just thought, what if our children reject us? What if they think we are the worst parents in the world? What if, you know, they run out of the house and don't ever want to come back? And I just had so many fears as a mother that I was going to be letting my children down. You know, we had taught them all of these years, taught them the gospel, and all of a sudden we were coming to them and saying, just kidding, you know, everything that we have taught you. You know,
yeah, that's something parents really feel is the kids believe because the parents taught them to believe, right? And so now you're ripping it out from under them. And do you do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I think we both recognize, look, our like you said, our children believe in the church because we told them to believe in the church. Mm-hmm. If we walk in and say we don't believe, well, then how are we making sure that they are really, just like as members of the church who wanted them to gain their own testimonies, right? How do we make sure that we're not completely driving the ship for them? Because, you know, you're starting to feel very culpable as a parent, right? And I know that Laurie expressed many times, you know, while she intellectually was seeing it, she really hadn't had a lot of time to get comfortable with it like I had for many years. So that she was still having this, okay, are we sure we're right?
Yeah,
you know,
I was.
right?
So what'd you do?
Well, we decided after talking amongst ourselves and talking to Jenny that we would talk to our kids. We felt like that's what we needed to do. Like I said, with our oldest, you know, he was going to be going on a mission, and if he still wanted to go, that was fine, but we needed to let him know that we were having some doubts. So I think it was on a Sunday as well, and we just called our kids down, and they all came down, and I sat kind of quiet and just kind of let Doug take the lead. So
Yeah, and again, you know, leading up to the discussion of whether we should or shouldn't talk with them, one of my big fears, John, was I wasn't aware of this information before I went on a mission. I went out and taught people in South America that they were the descendants of Lamanites, and I showed them information that the church has since admitted isn't true. And I saw people convert to the church based on admittedly false information that even the church admits now. And my conscience could not handle letting my child go out and teach the gospel and teach people that their faith traditions were incorrect and that ours was correct, showing them the same old charts of Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon with Urim and Thummim, showing them the same old faulty archaeological evidence. And I couldn't, my conscience couldn't take that. And I just felt like, you know what, Jordan needs to know this stuff. And if he knows this stuff and he still believes and he goes, great. It was the same philosophy I had with Laurie, which is they just need to know. I can't control how they react to the information or what they're going to do with it. Mm-hmm. But my role as a parent is making sure they are armed with the correct information. So fortunately, Laurie agreed, you know, even despite her hesitancy, and we sat them down, and you know,
all of them, or just the oldest?
All three.
All of them.
All three.
Mm-hmm. So they were.
The youngest was
17.
17, 13, and 9.
Yeah.
And someone said 9's kind of young.
It is. Tanner's pretty
It is,
mature.
yeah, he is pretty mature, and we didn't go into a ton of detail. We were very simple in what was said.
Yeah, Jenny really had coached us to just keep it very simple and very high level, and then to let the conversations happen down the road. And that's all we really did. We called them down and said, hey guys, we need to have a talk. You know, our oldest was immediately suspicious, you know, and he came downstairs very concerned because it was middle of a Sunday afternoon. We don't usually call a family council, you know, middle of Sunday afternoon. And
Well, and he later told us, I mean, he was 16, 17 years old. He could feel the contention between Doug and I, even though we tried so hard to hide it, you know. Kids are smart. They know.
And he had a number of friends in our neighborhood whose parents had divorced, and I think it was one of his biggest fears is, you know, he had friends who said, I had no idea my mom and dad weren't happy. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden mom and dad are telling him they're getting divorced. So I think that was, he had a little, you know,
he was
stress about that in his life that he was dealing with. So when we called him down, he came down and just said, is anybody getting divorced? No. Is anybody dying from cancer? It's like, no. Like, okay, just relax for a second. We're going to talk, you know. So yeah, I just started off by telling them, you know, we have some concerns about the church. We've been studying some things that we were not aware of and that have caused us to have doubts. And, you know, your mother and I have been talking about it for many months now. And, you know, we have great doubts as to whether Joseph was who he said he was and whether the Book of Mormon is what it claims to be and whether the church is true. And so, you know, they were fairly shocked.
Yeah, and that was really all that was said. But Jordan immediately said, our oldest, he immediately said, I don't care if the church is true. As long as you and Dad are okay and nobody has cancer, he said, I don't care if the church is true.
Did that surprise you?
It did. It
why,
really did.
Why did that surprise you?
I thought it was going to just completely devastate them. And it surprised me. It more made me feel terrible because then Jordan later told us how he had been so worried because he could feel a little bit of contention between us. And just like Doug said, a couple of his very close friends, their parents recently had divorced. And Jordan was sitting up in his room worried about us, but he didn't come say anything. And that broke my heart to know that one of my children, you know, was so worried about that. So that was just his initial reaction. As long as you and Dad are okay, I don't care. Mm-hmm. So
that was our oldest reaction. Our daughter, who was 13 at the time, she got emotional, and she was of the same kind of opinion as Jordan. But we then started having these kind of conversations, much like what Jerry and Julie had with their kids, where she said, Dad, I've been struggling, where I go to seminary and we talk creationism. I go to science, we talk evolution. And I've been so conflicted, right? And so all of a sudden, sitting there talking to our kids, at 45 years old, you forget that you had things going on your shelf from a very early age, right? We had these things, just like a child starting to see the signs that Santa Claus isn't real, right? As a child, there were things that you noticed about the church that you just put on a shelf and just decided to just trust your parents and everything. And so from a very early age in the church, we're taught to stuff it down. We're taught to just shelf it and ignore it. And it just dawned on me all of a sudden, sitting there listening to my daughter, that it's happening to her, right? And then Tanner, he actually got the most emotional, and he was just kind of like, so wait a minute, are we Mormon anymore?
Yeah.
And we just kind of said, Tanner, we're not quite sure yet, but don't worry, we're going to talk about it. And then we had this nice conversation, and I think a good moment, and then we all stood up and hugged, and then everybody said, can we go down and watch a movie? So we all piled downstairs, and we just watched like Shrek, and then just made popcorn and just kind of snuggled on the couch downstairs, and it was good.
Yeah.
And I think they were genuinely relieved that there wasn't something serious going on, and that we were talking to them as parents and being open.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic that they didn't perceive that as serious. Is that because
That's
we
what I was
think...
gonna say.
Well, go ahead.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say when he just said that. I mean, to us, living this for 45 years, this was huge. This was a very serious, very huge problem. And in their eyes, it just wasn't. And I was shocked by that. I almost felt like, I was relieved that my children took it so well. I felt a little bad. To be honest, I felt a little bit like I wasn't a very good mother. Like I thought I was this, strict, or not really strict, but this straight Mormon, and we had taught our kids from the moment they were born, and they went to primary and young men's and young women's, and I thought that it was going to devastate them, and it didn't.
Just for a little, I'm doing these little coaching moments here and there. What many of us don't realize is that, 30 or 40 or 50 years or 60 years of sort of intense church participation, combined often with mission and the temple and endowment ceremonies, packs a whole lot of belief and conditioning into one's experience. And what we sometimes forget is that a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, they don't have all that. And so, you'll have some highly scrupulous, conscientious kids, or who in some accelerated fashion internalized everything in really deep ways. But more often than not, kids, when they're in their early or mid-teens, when they hear about this, they're often either relieved, or they've been having problems too, or frankly, they're kind of disinterested, or sometimes even excited, because in some cases, church wasn't really working for them anyway. And so in some instances, the fears of talking to kids can be unfounded. Now, there are exceptions to that, but that's my experience, is that they take it surprisingly well.
Yeah. And Jenny had tried to tell us that as well.
Yeah.
And I think that helped us, have the courage.
But most importantly, it's sort of shocking. It's shocking to me when you find out that some of these kids were suffering with their own significant doubts and scared to tell mom and dad.
Right.
And so think about that as a huge potential gift of going through a faith crisis. You take these kids that are alone and suffering and feeling like they can't even talk to their parents about what they're experiencing. And by opening this Pandora's box and talking to them about it, you get to take a kid out of that place of hiding, internalizing, and suffering, and bring the conversation out in the open, where there's vulnerability, which means emotional intimacy, which means better connection with your kids. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure.
Anything? So that was it. It sounds like it was.
Yeah,
that
night went well, and we just said, look, we'd like to talk about this stuff, a little bit at a time, and mom and dad will share with you, some of these things, and we'll talk about them as a family, and we'll talk about what they mean. And, you know, I turned to Jordan. I just said, look, Jordan, you know, I can't in good conscience, you know, not tell you these things before you go on your mission. So I just want you to know, you know, if you look at this stuff and you disagree with us and you want to go on a mission, I'll be in the front row when you give your farewell, right? But I just need to, as a parent, now that I've been educated, my role as a parent is to educate, is my opinion. And so
we did let our kids know, though, I was probably me, that we were not going to force them to listen to this. We said we would love to talk to you about some of these issues, but we are not going to force you.
So respecting their journey.
Right.
Right.
And obviously we knew that their curiosity meant they would come and ask. You know, we didn't have to say, okay, every Sunday night we're going to sit down and have a church history moment. Like, so, you know, we knew that our children are pretty inquisitive kids and they would want to ask us questions. So, but at least in terms of that first conversation, it went better than we could have hoped. Yep. There was a lot of love in the room. Our family felt very close at the end of the evening. And once again, it was like I had won the lottery again. So.
Yeah, it was a huge stress off of both of our shoulders that our kids had taken it so well.
Love it. So, Julie and Jerry, anything else you want to add about that conversation with your kids?
Well, I think it's totally right. Our kids don't have as much invested as we had. Like you said, you know, there's not missions and, you know, weddings and all that kind of stuff. They've only had a few years. And the fact that when we were able to open up to our kids, they felt comfortable to open up to us and tell us their doubts and the things that had been bothering them were, you know, like you said, they would have never had brought those up because they would have been too scared, you know. And the conversations that we've had since, not even started by us, but our kids coming to us to talk, have been
awesome. Floodgates were open at that point. It was interesting because the way that we started the conversation was we wanted our kids to know how much we loved them, and it was all about them, and and
we were willing to do whatever our kids needed. We would have, you know, continued to go just for them, right. You know, and whatever they needed, we were totally willing to do.
Yeah, but it also, I mean, I agree with Doug in that you have a responsibility to. There's only certain things you hide from your kids, and you only do it if you absolutely need to. You know, there's certain levels of, I mean, we wait till a certain age before we talk about the birds and the bees, right? And there's a reason for that. But for the most part, you really shouldn't be hiding things from your kids, you know. And I had this flashback when our eyes started becoming more open. I had this flashback of memories of my father helping friends out with what he called anti-Mormon stuff. I mean, all throughout my high school years, I can remember him sneaking into his office and reading things in private, and he even would tell us, "Don't ever read this stuff," you know. And so when this happened here, I started realizing what he called anti-Mormon is probably just what we learned just now. That means my dad has known this stuff since I was a kid. Why don't I know this? You know, and it actually made me a little bit mad. I thought, I can't believe he on his own went and learned this stuff and didn't inform us in any way about it. So that made me think, no, it is my job to make sure that my kids they don't get to 40 years old and go, Dad, how come you didn't tell us this stuff? You knew this all along. And I'm amazed at how mature. It's just some of the comments our kids have said since, and it's just crazy things that they go and you go, wow, you really, it's almost like in some ways parents are preventing kids from thinking, you know, because you're kind of stifling them. It's like, no, don't think, you know. And when you let them go, they're so much smarter than you think they are. It's crazy. And we've had some of the best conversations with our kids since then, because they know they can come and tell us anything. Nothing's gonna, it's not gonna change anything. And
those are our favorite. When they come into our room, you know, it's usually like at night, you know, they come walking into our room, can I ask you a question? You know, and we're like, oh, yes, you know, and they turn into these great conversations.
Yeah.
It's really, it's fun.
I think the other thing to point out too, and when the CES letter came out, I already gone through my faith transition. I hadn't told Laurie yet, and this letter is getting passed around everywhere, right? And kids have these magical devices that they hold in their hands, right? So the CES letter gets emailed to the entire LDS Business College, right? It makes the Deseret News and the Salt Lake Tribune.
I heard about a youth conference like in Colorado where they were like traveling to church history sites, and all the kids found out about the CES letter and were sharing it during the youth conference trip to the church history sites, right?
Wow.
It's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the things I would tell Laurie is, look, I said, all it takes is for somebody who's a friend of Jordan's, who's got a brother at LDS Business College or whatever, and I think it was also in the news that it was making the rounds at BYU. I was like, we can't prevent our kids from seeing this. They're going to see it. And how are we going to feel 5 years down the road when Jordan goes through this faith transition on his own, on his cell phone, and then he finds out that we knew all this stuff all along? Like, he's going to kill us, right?
He'll be mad.
And so, and not only that, but I think members of the church have to just be aware that, you can't prevent your kids from seeing this stuff, and you'd better be prepared with how to answer these questions.
Love it.
Yeah.
So how did you guys handle talking to extended families? So your parents were pretty cool with it, Doug. I'm wondering, Laurie and Julie, did you guys circle back to your dad? And if so, what was that like?
Well, before even talking to our dad again, we had found that it was kind of best, if possible, instead of like writing a letter, that talking face to face, we felt was a better way for us to communicate what we were going through, if possible, or at least on the phone. And so,
But I got to say, we're representing a long period of time of discussion back and forth, right? I
months.
mean, the four of
between
us,
us?
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, trying to figure out the best way to talk to both friends and family.
Yeah. And it was
And many
scary.
things were
It was.
written, and many ideas, it's like, maybe we should Doug's like, maybe just give him my notes, I mean, there was a whole bunch of different things going back and
And we
forth.
dragged our feet because we were
Yeah.
scared to do it.
I mean, we talked about
was-
flying to each of our siblings' houses and sitting down face to face, and we talked about everything.
Yeah.
The best way to do it.
But
you
it
know.
seemed like face-to-face was the best way. when
Yeah,
Malcolm
so
and
we
Dad
had the opportunity. I have a brother who lives in Wyoming who's in the state presidency there, and he and his wife were coming to Utah for General Conference in April.
So the fact that we were the only family members that lived in Utah meant we were the de facto hotel every year for General Conference.
Yeah. They actually did not stay with us that time, but I called them and said, hey, when you guys are in town, could Doug and I get together with you? We wanted to talk to you about something. And then I said something about, but let's just do adults. Let's not bring the kids, because obviously I didn't want him to bring his kids and we wouldn't have been able to talk. And he later told us that was like a red flag to them. Like, wait a minute, they don't want us to bring our kids, and they knew nothing about what we were going through. And so we met them at a restaurant and we sat down with them, and we just opened up. And
What'd you tell them?
I let Doug do most of the talking again. I to start off, and
So we had this conversation with a number of people, and this was the first. But what seemed to work well was to sit down and say, in 2007, I read this book that was sold at Deseret Book called Rough Stone Rolling. Have you heard of it? And if they hadn't, I'd just tell them briefly a little snippet, and I would give them a very miniaturized version of my faith crisis, not getting into technical details or church history issues, just talking about, at a very high level, not even mentioning like Book of Abraham or multiple versions of the First Vision or Book of Mormon archaeology. Not even mentioning that. In fact, we would start off the conversation by saying, we want you to know we're not going to say anything here to try to plant seeds or to cause you to not believe in the church. That's not what we're here for. So we would spend about 15, 20 minutes just kind of slowly building up to the conclusion that they could see that was coming. And just say, I got to the point where I told Laurie, and we've been going through this, and I'm to the point where I don't believe, and Laurie would express,
I wasn't believing.
I wasn't believing, and then just tell them that, we wanted to tell them face to face because we love them. We care about our relationship with them, and we don't want to lose them as family members or anything, and just try to reassure them that we're never going to do anything to try to get your kids not to believe in the church. Just try to make them feel safe, that we're not a threat to them, to their way of life, or to their children, but to let them know that we no longer believe in the church, and we're going to love you even if you guys continue to believe in it. And we just hope that you guys, we know this is hard for you to hear, but we hope over time that, you guys, will feel the same, and so. And
we meant that when we said we will never do anything to hurt you or to hurt your children. I mean, that was truth. Mm-hmm. We didn't want to hurt anybody else, and we wanted them to know that. And my brother and his wife were kind, and he said, you are family. We love you. We do not agree at all with what you are doing.
Well, mind you, their brother's a stake presidency.
Yeah.
So,
but
and his father-in-law is a temple president.
Right. So I mean, they reacted exactly like I thought. They were kind. I don't want to know what you know. I don't agree with the path you are taking, but we love you.
They were visibly shaken.
Yeah.
But they responded much more positively than if you sent out a mass email or Facebook post. Mm-hmm. And her sister-in-law was very kind, and she even made the comment, well, I hope that you don't think any less of us because we believe, which was very telling comment, right? And we said, no, obviously not. We've been where you are. It's just we've seen things that you haven't seen, and we're not going to judge you because you haven't seen those things. And so, got up and we gave the somewhat forced hugs, but they were hugs nonetheless. and I'm sure they got in their car and just their jaws dropped, and that was that.
Yeah.
That worked okay?
Yeah. I mean, it worked as well as it could have, but we still had another brother and another sister.
And our dad.
And we had asked my brother, please do not talk to Dad about this. We want to, Julie and I and Doug and Jerry want to be able to talk to Dad, so we're telling you because you are here, and we had the opportunity to sit down face to face. And that's what we wanted to do with my dad. We hope to do that with all of our siblings. We were not able to, but for my dad, for sure, we wanted to be able to sit down face to face.
I think an important thing to point in this, John, as well, is that when you're having these conversations, despite how articulate you think you may be, despite how
right,
or despite how well you think you're explaining it, they're probably only hearing about 10% of what's coming out of their mouth because they are reacting as you're telling them. Yeah. And so, you just have to prepare yourself that after the fact, when you talk to them, which we have, it feels like 90% of what you told them they didn't hear. For example, when they asked us about Jerry and Julie, they completely misinterpreted what we were telling them, right? And they came away with the impression that Laurie was still somewhat of a believer. They came away with the impression that Jerry and Julie weren't on the same page with us. And so it's just one of those things where, as careful as you're trying to be to not hurt their feelings and be kind as you're telling it, they're really feeling like they're drinking from a fire hydrant.
Yeah. If I can just kind of share what I've learned about that is that we've evolved, and many of you will know this, we've evolved with these brains that have different layers. And the inner layer is sort of the inner region of the brain is known as the fight or flight system. And it evolved originally to respond to physical existential threats, sort of like lion in the jungle attacking you. And literally what that part of the brain does is it literally directs the blood flow out from your brain into the extremities of your body, so your limbs. It increases your oxygen intake, your breathing, and it shoots chemicals, hormones into your system that cause anxiety, because all of that is needed to prepare your body to run, right? Or to fight. And literally when that system is triggered, your IQ can drop 10 to 20 points. And that takes you from a person of average intelligence to a person comparable to someone who has a severe learning disability. You get dumber, significantly dumber, when your fight or flight system is triggered. And the thing about living in the 21st century is that fight or flight system can get triggered whether or not there's a physical existential threat. So something like, I may not want to be married to you anymore, or I'm sleeping with someone else, or I've left the church and I no longer believe, can be experienced as just as or more threatening than a lion running at you in the jungle. And so you have to understand that once you've flipped that, fight or flight system, their IQ drops and they're experiencing all sorts of internal panic and distress. And again, the blood flow literally leaves their brain. And so that's just a little bit of the mechanics behind why what you say is just not very important. Your job is to be reassuring and comforting to them. Even though you're the one who really needs comfort and support, you end up, if you want to have a constructive experience with them, you are the one comforting them. Because you guys said it yourselves. It wasn't until you felt comfortable, Laurie, that you were even willing to listen to or entertain the things that Doug had to say.
Right.
And in that moment, they're not feeling comfortable, and any information you give is going to end up just exacerbating the stress and the trauma that they're feeling.
Yep.
So it needs to be just a brief, nurturing, reassuring, loving, comforting conversation.
Now, I would say the mistake, this was the first time we sat down with someone, the mistake that we made is we probably did talk too long, right? I mean, while we didn't get into details, we did talk too long. I think also, since this was the first time we were sitting down with someone, it was both emotional for both of us, and it was harder for Laurie, obviously, being that it was her brother. So, I think you just have to be aware that they're going to interpret a lot of that conversation, in a lot of different ways, right? They interpreted Laurie's emotion as her maybe feeling the Spirit telling her she was doing the wrong thing, right?
That's true, because I was really quiet. I was very emotional. Like I said, this was the first time. This was my brother, who I knew I was going to be letting down, who was going to be disappointed in me, and so I was pretty quiet. And I think they took that as, I really wasn't on the same page as Doug, when in actuality I was.
So they're gonna exhibit and display a lot of confirmation bias in these conversations, which is why the advice to keep it as short as possible with as little detail as possible, I think, is very appropriate. And we tried our best that first time, but it was our first time, and we were trying to say as much as we felt like we needed to say without getting into details. But ultimately, it went fine.
Yeah.
And Laurie and Julie, how was the conversation with your dad?
So he actually came up to our house to visit.
In between that, Julie did talk to my younger brother.
Right. Well, I talked to both brothers on the phone.
The parents were the last.
Yeah, my dad
for all of us to tell.
was the last, and that's because we were waiting to talk to him face to face. And our other siblings pretty much took it the same way,
So Julie, how was your conversations with your brothers?
They were okay. My brother that they actually met with, when I talked to him, he did not know that Jerry and I were where we were.
We did not tell him. We thought that was their position.
And we had 100% at that point not stopped going to church. So at that time we were still going to church. But we knew where it was headed. And so, talking to my siblings, there was a few things that were said that were hurtful, especially because they didn't know exactly where I was at. And so they were saying things to me about Laurie and Doug that I thought, you're really saying that to me too, things that, just making it sound like they wouldn't be able to trust us, like we were going to be untrustworthy. And and it made me so sad, because I thought, we're still the same people. You know what I mean? We still are good people. We just view things differently. And that doesn't automatically make us horrible, people. So they're, for the most part, they were civil, they were kind, they said this doesn't, it's fine. I don't agree with you. I think you're wrong, but we still love your family. And, which, that's kind of what I expected,
But then
So-
there really has been no more conversations about it since then. Like, we've talked to our siblings and stuff, but there have been no conversations.
Well, they don't talk to us about it. So.
They probably talk
So,
amongst themselves
yeah.
about it, but not to Julie and I.
So then my dad came up to visit and
To Seattle.
up to Seattle, and you were living there by then.
We were both living
They had moved up by then, and so we actually, my dad pretty much knew kind of about them, did not know where Jerry and I were. Had a little bit of an inkling about it, but we went out to the cabin. There's been a lot of cabin talk.
There was a lot of stress.
Oh, so much. Just the six
With
of
all
us,
of
just
us,
the
yeah.
adults. So my dad is
Leading
since
up to
remarried,
this.
and his wife was there, and she is awesome. And she has been a huge blessing actually in this whole thing, because she's very level-headed and sees things a little bit more open-mindedly than most Mormons. She's pretty open-minded. Most of her kids have left the church, and so she just thinks, God loves everyone, and you are His children. It doesn't matter what you believe. And so, she was amazing to have there when we were talking to my dad, because she was a voice of reason that wasn't coming from us, And I think that was a long conversation, probably a couple of hours. And at first, he didn't want to hear it, but there was a lot of tears,
It was
and
heartbreaking.
just,
Heartbreaking
and
knowing
Why?
we were
because we knew
hurting
we
our
were
dad.
hurting my dad,
He has always prided himself on his children and, spouses and grandchildren, and, everyone was married in the temple, and many of us went on missions, and that's
Yeah.
always been something that has made him.
So we
Yeah,
knew,
my mom
we knew
proud
we
and-
were letting him down, and that hurts. That hurt, it hurts a lot. But he needed to know where we were at. I wasn't about to lie to him for the next however many years or something. So we sat down, all of us, and it started out rough, but we just pretty much just asked him just to listen, just hear us out. And it was rough. It wasn't easy by any means, but he was awesome. And by the end, it was hugs and kisses and I love yous, and this is not going to
doesn't
change our
change
family.
anything.
And he since then has been amazing. He really has. He just, he's just like, what? We are a family, and this does not change anything. We love each other, and that is what is most important. So he's really been great. But besides that, and no one talks about it.
Yep.
It's kind of the elephant in the room, but
And this is one of the things that people, maybe many progressive, liberal, and post-Mormons are most surprised about. They're like, how can these people love me and not ask? And oftentimes it gets shared amongst the ward, friends, community. You post on Facebook, and everybody, what they want is all the friends and family to rush to them and say, what happened? Why? And it's a reasonable expectation, you'd think, if you had these deep, emotional, connected experiences with all these people, they would want to beat down your door and ask every detail and fully understand what's gone on. But you just have to look at this situation to realize that, once Doug and Laurie told Julie and Jerry, it presented an existential threat to Julie and Jerry's faith. And so for the people that don't want to lose their faith, who choose or cherish or need their faith, they believe, over almost everything else, the most common response is going to be complete silence and to ignore. And it's something that so many, questioning, doubting post-Mormons struggle with. And you just need to expect crickets. You just expect it. Expect that the majority of people won't ever talk about it. And if you expect that going in, you won't be disappointed. Then the trick becomes finding people you can process it with. But you really can't realistically expect people to want to voluntarily choose to upend their entire life, their family, their marriage, their relationships, potentially their job. No one would sort of want to go. It's just like, who would choose to be gay in 2016 or 17? Who would choose to lose their faith? And that's why that's why people don't want to talk, and that's why you get crickets, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's hard, right?
Yeah.
It is hard.
The nice thing is, I mean, you know, we still all talk. So, you know, no one's shut us off or anything like that. You know, we still
But that
talk,
was really
so.
the only sibling they got to talk to face to face. The other two,
Yeah.
they had to do over the phone, and it wasn't as ideal, I think.
No, it wasn't. It's, you know.
Well, and we have one sibling that, to be honest with you, we have not even really spoken about it. We haven't told our stories. She hasn't wanted to hear.
She doesn't
I
wanna
tried,
hear
and she.
We've both tried.
Yeah, and she just said, "Dad, you know," and one of the brothers have told me, "I don't need to know. I don't agree," and that's that. So that's been kind of hard because we'd like them all to know what we've been through, you know, and would like to be able to share with them.
And I think there's a part of her that feels like, why wasn't I included as one of the sisters, maybe? Right? Here we're Laurie and Julie going through this together. Maybe she's upset that Laurie didn't reach out to her instead of Julie or whatever, you know. So, you know, there's just so many dynamics that are going on there.
So let's go to the next topic. How did you both deal with your bishop and your wards?
Oh, wait, you need to tell about your family.
Oh, yeah. Did you want? Sorry.
Well, I think it kind of blends in together because when we were talking about, I mean, we literally all talked about the best way to tell people. And so you start with low-hanging fruit, right? The easiest people to talk to. So we talked to my younger sister, the sister that had left the church when she was a teenager. And in fact, she came over to visit with her family. She's married and now has 4 children. And we told her we wanted to go out into the cabin and have a talk. And she was worried that we were going to try to bring her back into the church. And so we told her our situation, and her jaw just dropped. And she said, among other things, I mean, it was a really good conversation, but she said, "You're not the only one in our family going through this." And she told us about my younger brother who was also going through it. And the next day I called my younger brother and I said, "Dude, Jake, what's going on?" And we talked it through, and in doing so, you know, we were able to help them and them help us through this as well. You know, we had more people to talk to. And then my older brother, who came out years before this, I was able to call him and talk to him about his experience, and that was really, really cool to be able to do that. But these were the easy ones, right? I mean, there wasn't going to be any issues there. And then we started, even before some of our other family, we actually started with friends. And the first person I talked to was the bishop in my old ward, who I was a counselor for. And I thought, if I knew this guy, he's a good guy. He's not going to, he's smart. He's not going to, he's not going to shun me. And so I can go talk to him. And I was able to I actually asked him if I could come talk to him. And he said, "Oh yeah, talk to my executive secretary." So I set up an appointment, went in there and just told him what happened. And he was really, really cool. And it was a really good opportunity for me to kind of see what's actually important with these conversations. It's like because our main goal is we don't want to lose friends, right? We don't want to lose family. We don't want to lose friends. So how do you tell somebody? And I look at it this way. I mean, leaving somebody's religion like that, like you both shared a religion, it's kind of like, their innermost beliefs and secrets, and you just rejected them. I mean, it's the most intimate thing that you just rejected. You're looking at them in the face and saying, "I don't believe this," and it can be very, very hurtful. And so you got to be really careful to let them know, because they'll feel threatened. Let them know that this doesn't change anything for us. We still love you, and the only reason we're telling you is we don't want to lose you as a friend. And we found, and then we did that with other friends too, and we found as we did that we were able to keep our friendships with people.
Yeah. I mean, our really good friends in the church that we sat down with and had a conversation, 2-on-2, they're still our really great friends. which has been awesome.
But I think, and we've seen, everybody, we've heard things on Mormon Stories. We've had friends that have done it differently. We've had some friends that just went, that's it, I'm leaving, and they don't say anything. And the second you do that, the rumor mill starts. And everybody starts talking about you and if you get up and you leave, the rumor mill will be obviously that you're sinning, right? I mean, that's the first thing. And that's what we found happened with friends of ours that just kind of up and left one time. And as soon as they did, the people started, well, I know why they left. It's because this, and this. And you can't talk to everybody. There's no way of doing that. But we picked, the friends that we wanted to, the ones that we thought would handle it and we wanted to keep. And we went one by one and had multiple, who knows how many hour-long events, and going long is a hard thing not to do, as you can see. But it definitely, a one-on-one, being honest and making sure that you are, and it's like you said, in a perfect world, they would be coming to you. You're the one that's injured here, right? But it's just not going to happen. You have to be the adult. If you want to keep your friends, you have to be the one to reach out and do this, because it's just not going to happen the other direction. It just won't happen.
Beautiful. Okay, let's talk about how to deal with the bishop and the stake president. A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, the bishop's going to freak out. You both of you were kind of more well-respected, maybe prominent members of your wards and stakes. I mean, you guys were doing a multi-stake youth conference. So what happens? What do you do to either avoid the bishop or the stake president knocking at your door, asking for the interview, or if that's unavoidable, what do's and don'ts can you recommend about how to?
Well, I'll tell you how we broke into our bishop.
So you did?
Yeah, we were. I mean, we'd already been going through it for a long, long time. Had not.
We
said
were still
anything.
active.
We were still
doing
going.
our callings.
Yeah, we were still going. Still, serving in our callings, and we had been called into the bishop's office. I'd been in the primary presidency for, I don't know, a month or two, and you'd had the same calling for quite a long time, and we were called into the bishop's office, and I thought, oh, well, he's going to get a new calling. Not thinking, well, then why did I need to be there? But came into the bishop's office, and he says, well, Julie, we're here for you, and, is talking and says that he feels that he needs to call me as the primary president. And I just burst into tears, because I thought, everything I'm going through right now, there's no way that I could head up something like the primary. And so I started to just cry. And
So he's trying to give you a calling.
Yeah.
primary president.
Yeah.
And here I'm like ready to walk out the door. Any Sunday could be my last Sunday.
Right.
And he's telling me how, he feels I need to be the primary president. And so I just burst into tears, and I tell him I can't do it. And so he asked, well, do you mind telling me why? And I'm like, well, I said I'm really struggling, and I pretty much said I didn't think that Joseph Smith was very truthful.
She might have used the word fraud.
May have said fraud.
And it didn't go over.
No, well,
Is that useful, using the word fraud?
Well, I tend to be much more passionate, and of course my heart was racing as this is all happening. And our bishop is a very, very sweet man. He's very, very nice, and I have all these emotions running through my head, and I'm looking at Jerry, because we hadn't even talked about whether we were even going to say anything to the bishop or not, And I look at Jerry, and he's just like stone cold looking ahead, and so I basically say, I didn't throw him under the bus because I wasn't sure if he wanted to be there. And so I basically just said, I think Joseph Smith may have been a fraud. And I've been, researching, and I've been learning all of this, and there's no way I can stand up in front of those little kids and teach them something that I myself do not believe. I'm like, it's just not going to happen. Yes, there are things I can still teach. I can teach them about Jesus, and I can teach them good morals and things like that. But when it comes to Joseph Smith or, a number of other subjects, I'm like, there's no way that I can do that. And so he was very kind. I think he had to pick his jaw up off the floor. And we talked for a while, and, you know, he said, well, you know, continue to study, and I think you'll just come right back around. And, you know, half an hour later, he says, I really still believe you need to be primary president. And I'm like, have you not heard anything I've said? And I've never turned down a calling before. And I just told him, I said, I'm sorry, I can't. You know, there's just no way. So that's, and halfway through the conversation, Jerry did chime in and say, this is both of us. You know, it's not just me.
Yeah, and we had other talks with him as well. I think from our experience personally and then what we've heard, you know, the term is leadership roulette, right? I mean, there's a myriad of experiences out there, and some of them are not very good. Ours was really good. I think what you mentioned has a lot to do with it. The fact that we were somewhat prominent in the church, in the ward and stake, there was a mutual respect. Our bishop was very, very good to us. When we later on spoke to our stake president too, he was fabulous. He came to our house. He stayed in the cabin for about 3 hours or so, and we talked to him about our concerns, and he was really, really nice. He had been through it before. I think most of it comes from whether they've either been trained or they've been through it before. And if they've had multiple experiences with it, they start realizing, oh, I can't just simply, you know, tell them to pray about it, and we got to deal with this, you know. So the stake president had some experience, and he was very nice. We went through. So many things that went through my mind when all of this happened, and one of them was, don't understand how. At first, I thought, okay, people need to know this information. If they did, they would immediately say this is not true. And then you find out that there's a lot of people who know the information and they're still in the church. And you go, okay, how is that possible? So I was like infatuated with this idea. How do people know this and stay in the church? I need to know how people are doing this. So any opportunity we had to meet someone, and our stake president said that he was well versed in the history and he could help anybody. And we're like, okay, come over to our house. And so I was just ready for that moment when he just explained it in a way that would make it work, right? And we went through all of our doubts kind of like in chronological order. I mean,
Well,
not all of them, but we went
hit,
through
like 3 subjects.
we went through a bunch. And the amazing thing is he's just like, okay, I see where you can see that. And the funny thing is we got to polygamy, and that's when he started pulling out some pretty funny reasons for why polygamy. I mean,
He gave some strange
answers,
whoa.
and was like, no, that doesn't explain it at all. What are you talking about? And so, and I didn't think that polygamy would have been. Polygamy is so well documented. I mean, for the most part, I didn't think he was going to deny polygamy. So.
It was like he was uneducated on the topic.
Well,
despite claiming to be knowledgeable.
Yeah, but it wasn't that he was uneducated. I think he picked and chose what information to hold on to. I mean, he's a very smart, educated man, you know, but that was the subject that he did try to answer, and it didn't really work. So when we went through all of the doubts, he just simply said, let me draw you something. And he drew on a piece of paper a graph of, this is the amount of knowledge that exists in the world, and this is how much we know, and this is how much we don't know. And it was basically, this whole graph was, we don't know everything. And I thought, yeah, I know we don't know everything, but you do have to take in the information we do know. You can't just ignore the information that you do know. And if you use the logic, we don't know everything, then you can say anything you want and say, well, we don't know. You know, Scientology is true. I don't need to prove it because we don't know everything, but it's true. So, but that was his answer, you know. But he was very good, very nice man. He was very respectful, and so we had really good experiences with leaders, right? I don't think we ever had.
Haven't heard from him in a long time.
No, but again, it's like we were saying, you don't expect people to come to you. It's not going to happen. You have to reach out. You know, reach out to the people you care about, that you want to keep your friendship, and let them understand that this is not threatening. We're not going to go around preaching to your children. We're not going bring stuff up at uncomfortable moments just to see. I mean, we're not going to be buggers. We just want to be your friends.
just want to keep the
we
friendship.
want to have mutual respect
And
what,
we'd always told our friends that too. It's like we will not start talking about stuff. If you want to know, you're going to have to ask us.
yeah.
You know. So besides that, there's nothing to worry about. You know.
Right. And one of those friends that we had to talk to was my new business partner and his wife, and we have this brand new relationship that's starting, and that was really scary, but they were great.
Yeah.
They were really great.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes people give the advice just not to ever talk. Don't tell the bishop or stake president anything. Don't give them rope to hang you. You don't want to become a project. You don't want to be talked about in PEC. And you definitely don't want them to see you as a threat and want to come after you.
Well, and I think that's, like he said, it's kind of Russian roulette because, every bishop and stake president, they're going to react differently. We have a friend who, at the time, was in the bishopric, and he was like the first or second counselor, and he was at our house one day, and I said, okay, tell me. And we'd been out for, 6 months or so. I said, so does our name come up all the time in bishopric? He goes, nope. He goes, it doesn't. I'm like, oh. Well, there you go. We're not a project. So.
And I don't remember if we asked not to be a project. I don't remember.
I
don't know that we specifically said.
No, I don't
don't
think
come.
we did.
No, yeah.
But it's true. You never know because every bishop is different, and they're going to react differently. And
we really haven't had many people, if anybody, reach out to us or even come over.
No.
There's one time that we had the executive secretary emailed me and said the bishop would like to have a meeting with you.
And we had been out for a while.
Yeah, and I emailed back and I said, my door is open. I said, I'm not coming to church to have a meeting in a room. But I said, if you come to my house, I am more than welcome. And that was the last I heard from him,
They want to be on their turf.
Yeah, and you can understand why. I mean, I remember being an executive secretary and a counselor. It's like, yeah, you definitely want it on your turf. It's an uncomfortable situation. So.
Yeah.